If you think this is where you live, I'd say think again.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
And by the way, this is called gravity.
It's totally blowing my mind right now.
That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
What's up, guys? John the Morgile here, checking in for a new Flat Earth video for you. Hope you do enjoy it. So today we're going to talk about gravity. And gravity is one of the most important theoretical fictions involved with the standard/ball Earth paradigm. Whenever discussing the static plane Earth paradigm with those new to the topic, gravity will inevitably come up in the conversation, as it is indeed a powerful piece of the mind control program, which by and large hinges on the round Earth deception. Gravity is a phantom of the spinning ball Earth theory, which is only necessary if you grant the assumption, at least for argument's sake, that we live on a spinning ball in the first place. When you realize that the world is in fact a stationary plane, then the fact that dense objects fall and less dense objects or fluids rise is a result of the natural order of things, which is ultimately governed by the static electric charge of the Earth, it would appear.
Why is it that sometimes, out in the ocean, a boat could float, and then unfortunately sometimes it would sink? In order for a boat to float, all it has to do is displace its weight or push away its weight in water. This clay object I fashioned into the shape of a ball. This one I kind of made into the shape of a boat. It too weighs 50 grams. So, both objects are made out of clay. Both weigh 50 grams, but only one of these two is actually going to float. And you probably guess which one's going to float or sink. Let's start with the clay ball. Let's place it in this overflow tank, this displacement tank. And, not surprisingly, it sank like a rock. And a bunch of water is coming out on this end. How much water comes out? Well, if we wait long enough for all the water to drip out that would drip out, it would come out to about 30 milliliters on our graduated beaker. That is equal to the volume of this clay ball, that is, how much space it takes up. But what we're really interested in today is not something sinking, but more about why is something floating. So let me fish this ball out of the water, and this time, let's float the clay boat. Now to do this precisely, we have to... And look at this. It's floating, and it's pushing out a volume of water. Now this time, the amount of water that comes out on this side is not going to be 30 milliliters. It should be 50 milliliters at least.
The tendency for higher density objects or fluids to find their place of rest at a lower elevation to less dense media simply needs no further explanation when examined with the understanding that the world is not a spinning ball. Only when one assumes this ridiculous and absurd theory that we must invent theoretical apologies using some of the wildest mental acrobatics ever witnessed to come up with things like gravity. The fact that what goes up must come down is, under most normal circumstances, the fact of reality, which both sides of this discussion agree on. The mechanics of this rather simple system are what is under criticism and what is ultimately debunked in terms of the theory of gravity. Let's assume the Earth is a spinning ball hurling around the sun, as they claim. Then you would need some force to keep a person or oceans and lakes from flying off of the ball, especially as you approach closer to the equator, due to the alleged centrifugal forces which would necessarily increase relative to one's proximity to the equator. The fact of the matter is, there is no discernible difference between one's experience right smack on the equator or directly on one of the poles when you're allegedly standing in two completely different environments when it comes to sheer velocity. And again, at the equator, you're allegedly zipping along the circumference of the Earth at over 1,000 miles an hour, well faster than the speed of sound, and an observer at the pole supposedly not spinning at all. Certainly no 1,000 miles an hour, but about half the speed as the hour hand on a clock. The fact that gravity is sufficient to keep all of the world's oceans and lakes and butterflies stuck to the world with perfect balance, both at the Arctic regions and at the equator, in a fashion which is perfectly balanced with nature at all points equally, is a very impressive feat indeed for a force which is claimed to be inanimate or consistent from the equator to the poles. In other words, gravity allegedly applies itself evenly to all locations of the so-called globe Earth, according to the theory, completely irrespective of the world's spin at the given latitude. And yet we have this huge disparity between velocities, allegedly, at the equator versus the poles. If you mean to tell me you wouldn't notice the difference between going around a curved surface at 1,000 miles an hour and standing still, then I got a bridge I'd love to sell you. Let's also keep in mind that we have to combine the alleged spin of the Earth with the orbital velocities, and that's a whole nother video in and of itself, but it is important to remember that we're not talking about a system with no acceleration, because that is what we should sense and detect and measure and document is acceleration. And so from morning to night we have an acceleration that is vast, going from 66,000 miles an hour in one direction to 66,000 miles an hour in the opposite direction every 12 hours, switching direction, switching velocity 180 degrees. Huge amount of acceleration just in terms of the orbital velocity of the Earth plus the alleged axial rotation. And we also must combine that with the galactic frame of reference and everything, but again, that is another video. Speaking just specifically of the problems with gravity, the spinning Earth, again, it varies from latitude to latitude, yet the experience does not. It is claimed that things weigh slightly less at the equator due to the centrifugal force, but it is a negligible amount. I would need to measure that for myself before I would call it a fact, because the amount is so minuscule. I'm sure that it is within the margin of error of any of the equipment used to measure it in the past, if it ever has even been measured. I would submit that it's possible that nobody has ever traveled actually to the equator and weighed an object and then mailed the same object to the North Pole and had someone else weigh it. What goes up must come down is completely contrary to the spinning ball Earth due to the manner in which centrifugal forces operate. And even though it is indeed contrary to the entire layout of the system, spinning around on a ball, things somehow fall to the Earth. The theory of gravity is thus crafted to apologize for this fact, completely disagreeing with their idea of reality, and somehow or another it has become exclusive proof of the spinning ball Earth. So people like Neil deGrasse Tyson will drop their microphone on the ground to prove that the Earth is a spinning ball, or to prove gravity, or whatever he's trying to prove. But the fact of the matter is, he's demonstrating what goes up must come down. That is a fact that everybody agrees on. Only in the spinning ball Earth theory must one do mental acrobatics and gymnastics to arrive at a comfortable position where you can explain why things fall. And of course, the theory of gravity is just so far out there. When you look at it, they claim that the fabric of infinite space is not only physical space, but non-physical hypothetical time, space-time. It's one thing, which is, in my opinion, just patently absurd. And just because Einstein thunk something up does not make it a fact. Space and time simply cannot be meshed together into a fabric. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. That is theoretical mental gymnastics, which is only necessary if you first assume the Earth is a spinning ball flying around in outer space. Now, furthermore, when large, very large, and only very large objects disrupt the fabric of space-time, there is essentially a surface tension created, and space and time push back against the disruption in it from the giant massive ball. And so that's why things stick to the side of the spinning ball, is because space-time is displaced by the giant ball Earth and is thus pushing back down upon it. That's what they claim gravity is. It's frankly ridiculous. It's one of the most ridiculous things you'll ever contemplate, actually. And yet, the fact that objects fall, high-dense objects fall, is somehow equated to exclusive proof that the Earth is a spinning ball, of course. Of course. Because everything comes back to proving the Earth is a spinning ball. because that's what they taught us when we were gullible toddlers, and that's what we're going to continue to think until the day that we die, even when presented with evidence to the contrary, just all over the place. There's never-ending mountains of evidence to prove that the Earth is stationary just as it seems, and is a plane just as it appears, right? Gravity, again, it's only necessary in the event that the world is a spinning ball, and when you prove the fact that there is no curvature of the Earth, and it is not a spinning ball, it is in fact stationary, and it is a plane, when you prove that, the theoretical necessity for gravity goes right out the window, so it's not even theoretically necessary anymore. We don't need to explain why objects fall to the ground. Objects fall to the ground based on their relative density. Density and buoyancy is definitely a thing that everybody can agree on, and the crux of density and buoyancy falls down to one thing. What causes relatively high density objects to fall? And the fact is, the Earth holds a static electric charge that's measurable. Static electric charge is always of an attracting force, and it will attract higher density objects at a greater rate or at a greater ratio than less density objects or fluids.